Oh, yeah. Space cowboy in the galaxy wide, spreading love, can't hide his stride. Venus to Mars, every starry night, laughing loud, shining so bright. Rocket boots dancing on the moon, charming hearts with his cosmic tune. Guitar strumming under alien sun, he won't stop till the day's won. He's the intergalactic gigolo, galaxy-wide he's the show. Spreading love everywhere he goes, stars and laughter in his flow.
Oh God. Sorry, y'all, just looking at the chat. Thoughts? No, I haven't been reading 50 Shades of Grey. God. Hey, but hey, it's not my fault the female lead in the movies is an actress named Dakota. Got my tea. Well, welcome. First off, before we get into this, I hope y'all that like to tune in from across the pond that got hit by a storm. Ewan, I think it's pronounced. I hope y'all doing all right. Those of you in Ireland, Scotland, London, whether you love me or you hate me, I do hope that y'all are doing okay, because from what I've seen, that was a mess. Dear Lord. Ooh. No offense to y'all, but I'll take the mild-ass winter we've been getting in my little neck of the woods. And yes, Dakota still sounded a little congested, but hopefully the meds will kick in soon so I can be understood. Lawrence, how you doing, my friend? Good to see you. So, for today's episode, I wanted to address something that was asked of me by a viewer not a little while back. Sent it to me through email. In regards to the human gray hybridization, all the stories of abductions and gene splicing and trying to create hybrid species. As the topic of UFO disclosure becomes more and more prevalent in today's society, we got a few more people walking into this who don't really have much of a lay of the land when you really think about it. So, as you can imagine from their perspective, it's going to get very easily... It is going to be very easy to get confused about what's actually going on out there. Whether you want to believe that's done by design for misinformation purposes, people trying to claim fame, all that fun stuff, that's a whole other topic altogether. Personally, I think it's a mix of those two reasons, because historically speaking, people have notoriously been unable to keep their story straight. They want to get into the gossip, they want to spread the news, they want to do all this. And they may not even realize that when they go to retell certain stories, that they fudged up a few details. Just read through the chat real quick. Yeah, one hell of a storm through Dots and avoided me. All good here. Oh, good to hear. Good to hear, guys. Well, obviously, if you're in here chatting, yeah, y'all doing all right. But for everybody else, you know, focus on getting yourselves taken care of first. The shows ain't going anywhere anytime soon, in spite of any attempted controversies, which tonight's topic, once I might actually get into it, probably will stir up a little bit. Now, this individual who was to ask me about the whole gray hybridization, they sound like they've come across a few of my interviews where I've discussed a little story, a little family story of mine, if you will, where one of my grandmothers was allegedly, and I'm using that because I'm not sure the validity of the story, it's just something that was more along the lines brought up for a conversation because I showed a little bit of interest in starting to look into UFOs, and some of my family members like, "Oh, did you know your grandma was abducted? Huh?" And you people are waiting to tell me this now. Why? I really should do that DNA test. Anyway, that's another topic. But so, for those of you who don't know the story, it is alleged. We're just going to use that frame reference for the circumstances that my paternal grandmother, so my father's mother, that's how I understand it, may have actually been abducted several times involving the Grapes. And she has had her eggs extracted for hybridization. And the story goes a little bit further, which is conveniently where they keep leaving off the story anytime I try to, dig for a little bit more information, maybe cross-check it, check with some of my other resources, do cross-reference, all that fun stuff, because I like to actually try to know what the hell I'm talking about when I go onto these things, not totally BS. Is that these children produced had a bit of a failure to thrive situation to where they apparently needed mother's milk. So you can imagine the horror when I first was told this story of having this mental picture in my head of my grandmother being milked by Greys in order to help what's essentially my uncles and aunties Essassani survive. For some of you who aren't as in depth in the UFO discussion, you may not know what that term means either. Essassani or Sassani, there's a few different ways that I've seen it spelled, are essentially a hybrid race between malevolent ET forces. And I need to know, I'm noting that for specification because ironically, and I'm only saying this because Dots brought it up in the chat, when it comes to the galactic situation, it is not so black and white where, say, the sexy humanoids are the good guys and the Greys are the bad guys. There's a few thousand shades of gray. For diplomatic reasons, everybody has their own motivations, their own political interests, things like that. Not much different than what's here on Earth. It's just that some groups are a lot better at cooperating with each other for mutual interest. So, and the part that gets a lot of people confused in regards to the Essassani is exactly their motivations. If you look into, let's see if I can have it on my shelf here real quick, just to show for reference. But there you are. The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac by Craig Campobasso, who is Hollywood casting director. He does a lot of workshops to help people get into the business, stuff like that. But he's also a big name within MUFON. See if I can find. I just flipped right to the fucking page. Score! So, I'm going to try bringing this up on screen. I'm going to probably have to turn off virtual background because I'm a dork. Oh, come on, you piece of shit. Work with me, damn you. Woo. Okay. Anywho, see. All right. So, just to kind of read off a little section real quick, just for reference. And there's the fucking setting I needed. There. See, a lot more colorful when I had the background turned on, but according to MUFON, the Essassani, or Essassani, however you want to go about it, look a bit like that. Okay? Just for reference. They also state that there are 7 different varieties that belong in that particular group, depending on the categorization. It really depends on how much of what races are mixed into it. Let's turn this back on. There we go. That looks better. With MUFON, they list that these beings are positive, they're following the cosmic law of one, that they're essentially us from a parallel Earth 300 years in our future, that came here because genetic experiments they did kind of screwed up their genome code, and basically they need samples of our DNA in order to re-implement into their genetic code, so that way their species can survive. Now, if you go into sources like Elena Denon, she doesn't directly reference a lot of information regarding the society, but there is a brief mention in it for one of her books. If you follow Miss Denon, you also may have noticed that there is a lot of warning in regards to this species. That their hybridization isn't necessarily for benevolent purposes. In fact, it's for a purpose of infiltration. To essentially blend our genetics with their genetic lineup, so the offspring that are set to take over are able to better thrive on this planet, which is a common practice for a lot of ET races. And as well as these beings, the fact that they do look very similar to us, they act very similar to us. In my experience, a lot of certain gray species a lot of their behavioral characteristics can seem very similar to individuals who may be on the autism spectrum. Now, this isn't saying that autism originated from the Greys. This is just an observation of my own. But regardless, the idea is that these beings are supposed to be so human-like, it appeals to humanity's inherited traits, our inherent need to try to take care of our young. It plays on the fact that we're a very social species. We try to look for our group. We try to look out for our people. We try to look out for our tribe, things like that. So, don't worry. I'm getting there, Dots. I'm getting there. There's a little bit more science to it that I don't think a lot of people realize. So that's why I wanted to bring this up. There's a story. There's a story. But like I was saying before, here we're just gonna bring up Dots' comment on the screen so people can see what I'm talking about on the video side. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Trust me, brother. I'm getting there. From a genome perspective, a lot of these races have such an understanding when it comes to how to mix certain genetics to where they can practically gene splice whatever the hell they want and make this brand new species that are viable enough to stand there on their own. And a lot of the stories about the Greys needing our genetics because they screwed up their own so much from cloning processes, their own experimentations. Again, that goes to try to appeal to the fact that people, generally speaking, want to try to help out. And by having potential familial ties with these hybrid races, that's going to complicate things. What would you say? There might just be a certain part of individuals that think, wait a sec, technically speaking, these things are family. Family's supposed to try to help each other out, right? Even though technically speaking, and can go into a little bit more of a philosophical argument that the Essassani could technically be painted as just as much victims in this whole mess, this whole war that's been going on, as the rest of us. Dot's made a very valid point. It's the fact that a lot of gray species have essentially a hive mind that was historically compromised. And the Greys seem to have this belief that by messing around with our genetics, trying to hybridize us, and potentially utilizing a few other unsavory methods, that even though a lot of people are coming out with the fact that it's been suppressed by the government, it'll still get you flagged on social media. The idea was to try to make us compatible with said hive mind as much as possible, even if, how could I put this? Say like their radio, like old school radio, where sometimes certain channels can come in earlier than they're supposed to because the signals are just barely lined up for the radio, say like your car receive them. I know. I'm talking old school technology, for those of us who grew up without Apple CarPlay and all that fancy stuff. Before the age of Bluetooth for some of the younger audience members. I'm barely 29, so don't try to call me an old man. Fuck you. Anyway. Exactly. The signals are piggybacking off of a lot of each other. So the idea was on a biological level that just enough would piggyback to where they could influence our race. Here's the thing, when it comes to how this works, there is actually a scientific backing that makes this entirely possible. Which, in theory, makes this several times more disturbing than it actually is when you really think about it. And it falls under a term that is well recognized within the scientific community. You can look this up. That's called microchimerism. Microchimerism. Which essentially is a well-known phenomenon where foreign DNA samples from another individual can integrate themselves within a person, usually temporarily, but depending on the circumstances, that physical DNA change can last for several years. And some people may wonder, why does it always seem like women are picked on the most when it comes to these types of stories? Well, unfortunately, while men do get abducted, historically speaking, we tend to be a little bit more stubborn in regards to opening up about these types of stories. So you got to remember that is a big factor. Another thing is it runs down to our physiology. Biology works against you, ladies, as if you didn't already know that. Going back to microchimerism, there is a phenomenon known as fetal microchimerism, which is where DNA from the baby gets implanted back into the mother, especially if something happens while the mother is pregnant and there is there's an exchange of stem cells that the baby will shoot out to the mother in order to try to patch up any wounds that may have occurred, so their biological housing unit isn't compromised. Stem cells that get sent out to the mother from the baby, those DNA markers can actually stay within the mother, they say, for about 7 years. And in a lot of cases, if that mother has children within that time frame, those DNA bits could actually end up in the siblings, in the younger siblings. Dear Lord. God, just kick this crap. Sorry. So what does that mean for when it comes to this gray hybridization? It means that when a woman is implanted with a possible gray hybrid child, it means that woman is essentially being reprogrammed from within. There is some speculation about whether or not microchimerism could be responsible for why couples who have been together for a long period of time actually start to look like one another. But for obvious ethical reasons, it's very difficult to test that theory in accordance to mainstream science. But still, in regards to just women in general, they got the shitty end of the deal. Because typically, they're also born with all the egg cells they're ever going to produce in their lifetime. Whereas men, we cycle out about every week. So the windows of opportunity are much shorter with us. This lays the groundwork for natural evolution to essentially take its place, to run its course, to where individuals who undergo these processes, there might actually be some strange phenomenon that starts to kick up. They might be they might seem to be a little bit more intuitive than their peers. They might have certain social behaviors, again, akin to traits that are well associated with those on the autism spectrum. Things like that. And the changes might seem minor at first, but prolonged exposure to this could actually influence the entirety, could influence human evolution itself. It could create branch species because of this mix up of DNA. Now, regardless of whether or not you believe the Anunnaki interfered with our genetics or the Cedars are the ones that implanted the DNA, regardless of whether or not you follow those theories, humans, it is well agreed upon that early human ancestors, they messed around with each other a lot, which leading to modern humans. We have DNA mix-ups happening all the time. And it's believed in several instances that this crossbreeding, if you will, may actually be the result of several genetic abnormalities that are present even to this day. In regards to psychic phenomenon, anybody else find it a little funny that there is an overlap between alleged gray abductees and visions of angels? Anybody else ever notice there's an overlap there? Granted, finding legitimate cases where all this necessary criteria that I've spoken about already is present, that's going to be a little difficult to find because, let's face it, there's a lot of people just trying to jump on the bandwagon for their own purposes. They're not trying to join the UFO discussion because they believe they've had something happen. They're just wanting to be included in something. And yes, owls do seem to be another factor there. In fact, if you ever seen baby owls that are born without their plumages yet, they look a lot like the reports of grays. Something that hasn't exactly, something that's speculated to be the source of a lot of inside jokes in regards to this phenomenon. But I'm talking about the real stuff here. People ask me all the time because I try to analyze all this stuff and try to look into how it works and things like that. They question whether or not I'm actually a believer. I am a believer that there is something going on, but I also think it's a little bit more nuanced than what most people realize. Going back to the story about dear old grandma, this same grandmother is believed by a lot of people to be able to communicate freely with angels. Now, naturally, when I first heard about this, I thought, okay, so there's the crazy grandma. But the thing is, though, folks, and there's actually been some people who have messaged me asking me, oh, am I related to so and so? Am I related to so and so? Because we all have the same surname. You heard me make a little reference to a little DNA test I still have yet to do earlier. That came out of a personal discussion with someone dear to me, where there's a lot of gaps in my family tree as I understand it. There is well, let's just say for those of you who've read my books, who've heard some of my stories from before, you know that there is some pretty valid reasons as to why I've essentially cut off members from my father's side of the family. And for those of you who caught the really, really long episode from a couple weeks back, where I was doing kind of a question and answers episode and how I ended that. Well, let's just say I've seen signs that one of my little brothers, same dad, different moms, just to illustrate it, has been apparently watching for some time. And I don't know, just seeing that and other mix of weird personal issues that have cropped up in here in 2025 made it so it felt like that was the best way to say, hey, if you want to talk, let's talk. But anyway, I got off a little off track there. Thanks, not. Going back to Grandma Dearest, there was a brief period where after my father had gone to prison, where he still sits and probably isn't going to be getting out anytime soon, where several family members from that side of my family tree actually started to reach out. One of them being the same grandma. This was still early on when I really started to jump into the supernatural as a whole. So I was about 15, 16 when this happened. So I was still a teenager, so already enough of a head case as is without dealing with the supernatural. But let's just say that in these conversations with dear old grandma, I became a little bit more convinced that there was an overlap, that something legitimate may have been going on. In one of the little short videos I did when experimenting with some of these faceless video AI programs that are out there, I talked about 3 universal signs that you may be dealing with a legitimate psychic. For my Frandsen Files compendium, this part's not released yet, but I redefined the term as extra dimensionally informed persons. This isn't an effort to try to conduct some sort of cancel culture on how psychic phenomena is understood. This was my way of incorporating individuals who, say, like Elena Denon, just as an example, whose information does not necessarily come from psychic means. And I'm stating that where if, say, like individuals like her, if they're wearing, say, like earbuds that are where the mic is close enough to her head, sometimes around the time she's saying she's hearing, say, like Thor Hahn, you hear electronic clicks. They're kind of faint, but they're there if you really listen to it. That indicates there is some sort of electronic transmission that's being intercepted by those mics. And it's one of the most basic ways that you can actually tap into phone conversations just by having a recorder standing close enough to a phone. It doesn't have to be on the speakerphone, nothing like that. And I have said numerous times, and it's that in spite of what you may think about Miss Denon, I've personally seen enough weird shit around that woman too, where I'm more than convinced she's the real deal. So back to the extra dimensionally informed persons. One of the sides, in fact, one of the biggest sides that I tell people to look for is if this individual that you're working with seems to have what I would usually call answers to me and God questions. Now, when I came up with that term, that was to mostly focus in on psychics, where if you want to see if they're the real deal, you try to see how easy it is for them to retrieve the information that they are able to recall about you, the person who's being read by them. Female voice saying frequencies came through Dr. Sal's show. Exactly. See? And I bet you, if you put on a decent pair of headphones, those of you who don't have any sort of hearing loss, whether it be from age or whatever the situation may be, you might hear a little bit of almost like a staticky interference just before that. It's usually very brief, but it's there. And most people I know who caught on to that fact, they tend to be more musically inclined, where their ears can pick up on certain tone changes and things like that. So it's a little easier for them. But anyway, going back to the me and God questions. When I came up with this, that was basically a way of saying, how likely is it for me to say, I'm the psychic that's giving the reading, to pick up that someone has had a loved one pass away? Well, first off, that goes into things like cold reading and all of that, but obviously, a common example, people say that if you're going to a psychic, chances are you're going through something that traditional means aren't providing a satisfactory enough answer for you. So chances are, if you go to a psychic and they open up with the line that you seem to be going through some troubles at the moment, well, you're going to a psychic. That's usually the first clue. But secondly, anybody who knows basic human psychology knows how to look for signs that someone maybe kind of have something on their mind. And for God's sakes, let's do more to be fucking kind to one another this year. If you see someone who looks like that, they got that going on, just check in. You don't even have to pry. Just say, hey, how's it going? Give them an opportunity to chat. Sometimes all it takes to save a life is the simple acknowledgement that you see that person. Anyway, again, see how easy it is for me to go off the rails? Anyway, but when it comes to like me and God questions, going back to the example, obviously, if you're going to a psychic, chances are you're going through something. But say that you just lost a family member, the psychic's able to tell you their name, maybe like a full family nickname that they would always call you, things like that. Personal details that would not easily be accessible to the public. One such example, and you can actually see this play out on an old episode of the Bald and Balker show. It's a perfect example. Whether or not it was just a random fluke by the guy who made a damn good guess or not, that can still be debated, but an example that I use is on the Bald and Balker show way back. We had a guest on who was allegedly a psychic medium. I never dealt with the guy before, so I try to be a little bit skeptical whenever I get people like that coming on board. But I try not to be too nitpicky. I try to let things progress, because chances are, if they're the real deal, that individual, something's going to happen to prove that individual is legit first in some matter. It may not necessarily dictate whether or not the source of their information, this is another thing that needs to be brought up. It does not necessarily dictate whether the sources of their information are either benevolent or malevolent. These tests just go to show that something is actually going on. You can't go off the rails if you lay your own track. I like that. I like that, Dots. What do you? But here's the thing. I don't necessarily lay the tracks, so to speak. I just go start running in a certain direction and hope I don't trip and fall too hard. To be completely honest with you. But anyway. So this individual claimed to be a psychic medium. Heard that he was good. All right, let's see what's going on. As we're going through the show, all of a sudden, he goes to call me by a certain name. Doesn't call me Dakota, doesn't call me Coda, none of the typical ones. He calls me by part of me wants to just say the nickname, but that also means that I'm going to have to find a new test. But being that it's technically out there, I'd have to find the new test anyway. Fuck it, I'm just going to say it. This gentleman calls me by the name Cody, which may not seem like a whole big deal, but for me, there's a little bit of a personal significance to that nickname. Outside of that episode and this, I've never had it published anywhere. I never talked about it, never went by it willingly, never used it, nothing. Because I actually hated that nickname growing up. I did. Because it came from my father's side of the family. I don't know why, but apparently my father thought Dakota was too long of a name, so he started trying to call me Cody. And only a very small group of what set me off, what kind of triggered me when the psychic called me by that name was that, again, there's only a small group of people, close family, who knew about that nickname. I'll even think most of my old girlfriends mentioned that, knew about that nickname. Speaking of which, I forgot to turn down my cell phone. Anyway. Check that out later. Get wings, dude. Oh, may as well. But anyway, like I was saying, with this psychic dude, the nickname Cody was only known by close personal family. I never wrote about it in any of my books. But then and only a smaller group of people actually ever called me by that nickname. Going further down, only one person out of that group had passed away. So in the heat of the moment, that kind of convinced me this individual was the real deal, that there was something legit going on. But I digress. Now, with me, it seems that there's certain paranormal influences on both sides of my family. Like I said, there's Uncle and Aunty Essassani on my father's side, as well as a bunch of stuff that's popping up on my mother's side as well. And in this regard, there was a bit of an incident where I firmly believe that the Essassani relatives of mine may have tried to stop and say hi. Now, comes to this type of stuff, and I find it funny that my signal's starting to act up on my end as I just talked about that. But anyway, I know the warnings about it, knew that it was dangerous to try to associate with these things, but I'm not going to lie and say that I wasn't at least a little bit curious. Wanted to see it for myself. There was an incident where I started to go into a little bit of a trance and started getting these visuals of like these really blinding white lights and seeing what looks like depictions of, biblically accurate angels. In short, there was also a being there who I mistook. Do you think you're in the spot of their genetic tinkering? Who knows, man? King James, who knows? Am I the spawn? No. Does my family screw around enough to where that there's plenty of possibility that I have relatives that I don't know about? Absolutely. But there was an incident where a being came forward that I mistook as Enki. And when I went to share this story early on, it caused a lot of controversy. Made me realize that I was hijacked in that moment. Was able to break free, but I digress. I guess it goes to show you exactly how this all managed to unfold. I'm still trying to piece together, but in those visions, there were aspects where it seemed like the facade was trying to short out. Something was trying to intervene to make me see what was actually going on and get me to pull out of there. And I couldn't help but wonder, is that what was happening with my grandmother? Because let's face it, I'll admit, that woman seemed to know a lot of situations that was going on. The point of this story is that as the coming days with UFO disclosure becomes a little bit more and more prevalent, and to answer one of the earlier questions I saw in the chat, yeah, there's been plenty of UFOs, but the fuckers keep disappearing quicker than I can get a camera pulled out. I'm gonna have to get some sort of strap across my head in order to start recording. We have to, anyway, as I was saying, in the coming days, we have to use discernment more than ever. We have to be careful about who we trust, who we listen to, and what we decide to look into, because sometimes things may be a lot more dangerous than we realize. Bald cam. I like that. Am I claiming I had interactions with Enki? No. Millions of folks have similar claims globally. Yeah. They do, brother. They do. Which, in my opinion, trying to find the source of these claims seems all the more prevalent, but all indications say that we go to looking for something, we go to find something. As far as I'm shocked nobody's made a joke about this yet, but as far as like stories involving anal probing, technically there is a way to stimulate sexual reproduction, the production of sex cells, by inserting something up rectally. That has been scientifically proven. So even though it is highly encouraged to use a lot of discernment regardless of the situation, it is going to be best that we use discernment then we try to follow those who show as much evidence as they possibly can, and I say it that way because it's going to be hard to fully prove a lot of these stories with the capabilities we have today. Don't trust everyone just because they may be your friends. Be careful what information you take in. But don't be afraid to explore and see the truth. My name is Dakota Frandsen, and I think that'll cover it all for today. I do have to get going, folks, so I'll see you on the next one.
Shooters or ladies in a trance, can't resist his astral dance. Meteor showers lighting up skies, with his charm no surprise. Planets cheer when he arrives, Jovian nights come alive. Solar flares in his control, romance written in black hole. Martian cities light up in glee, skyways open, love is free. Saturn rings a serenade, harmony in the stars display. He's the intergalactic gigolo, galaxy-wide he's the show. Spreading love everywhere he goes, stars and laughter in his flow. He's the intergalactic gigolo, galaxy-wide he's the show. Spreading love everywhere he goes, stars and laughter in his flow. He's the intergalactic gigolo, galaxy-wide he's the show. Spreading love everywhere he goes, though. Stars and laughter in his flow. He's the intergalactic gigolo, galaxy-wide he's the show. Spreading love everywhere he goes, stars and laughter in his flow.